Welcome to episode 207 of the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast, recorded live on December 9th, 2020. This is a show about Microsoft 365 and Azure from the perspective of IT pros and end users, where we discuss a topic or recent news and how it relates to you. Today, we do a deep dive into SharePoint Syntex and discuss licensing, features, and configuration. Pretty much everything you need to know to get started using it.
So says Ben.
So says Ben. Ben is sleepy. Ben
2 days in a row of working on European time will do that to you.
Yes, it is better than the 4 days I did in October, but it's, yeah.
So do you still feel like you could hop on a plane and just go spend those 2 days over there, or would you still do it at home, like given the situation?
So this particular training, I would much prefer to do in person, I think. Given the situation, though, I would probably still stay home. And frankly, I don't know that I'd want to fly over to Europe to do this for 2 days just to fly home again.
Oh, come on. I've done it several times. It's fun.
Okay. I would like to go, though, because honestly, I've never been to Europe.
Ooh, you're missing out on life.
I am missing out. So I had Europe the last 2 days. I have APAC now tonight and tomorrow night. So I got up at 2:45 this morning, did 7.5 hours of training. I worked all day today. I have slept for 30 minutes maybe. And then I have training again tonight from 8 p.m. until 2:30 a.m. So I'm going for a 24-hour stretch with 30 minutes of sleep.
Nice. You've got me way beat. I've only done APAC and Korea like twice this week. So... And it's only for an hour. It's not an 8-hour training marathon.
So yeah, let me tell you about this whole work from home thing. It's great, except that now everybody thinks you work all kinds of hours. So instead of you flying to their time zone or them flying to your time zone, you just work their time zone and your time zone. I don't know what's better.
Yeah. I've debated shifting my entire life just to Pacific time, being that the majority of my peers are in Redmond, and most of the times I get pinged for like critical information are at 6 or 7 p.m. my time. Like, hey, I need this by 5 p.m. Well, for me, it's already 7:30.
Yeah, you're kind of too late. 5 p.m. has come and gone.
That's great. Oh boy. All right. So now that you're loopy and you're just in this great place, let's do a deep dive today on SharePoint Syntex.
You know what? This sounded like a great idea.
I love it, and you've been looking at it, and yeah. But you took copious notes on it. You've played around with form processors, kind of the whole classification and extraction service that's in there. I think you've got some thoughts on it. Why don't we dive in and talk a little bit about it?
Dive into thoughts with a loopy Ben.
That's the goal. And yes. I'm always interested in like loopy Ben descriptions of services. So we should probably start with what is SharePoint Syntex in the context of SharePoint Online and Office 365, Microsoft 365, all that kind of stuff, the 10,000 foot overview, and then we can dive in a little deeper.
You mean I'm actually supposed to have to know how to describe this thing or give it a one sentence description?
Or you can just go read the paragraph from the documentation. All are valid.
You would assume I had the documentation in front of me. Instead, I just have my notes.
Okay. Well, then,
what is the document? Essentially, it's like document processing. It's taking some of the AI. Here's my description. And you can see if my description matches with the description if you have that in front of you. It essentially brings a lot of the AI functionality into processing and analyzing documents in certain ways that get stored in SharePoint Online. That's my description of it. Based on your licensing, you have different options. So we had actually talked about this. I first brought this up maybe a month or so ago, and I am a little more, I would say, optimistic about what features you get for the starting price point than I was a month ago. I had some incorrect assumptions on how licensing and how some of the functionality worked.
Yeah.
Which
what's going on there? Because you've got what is it? You've got licensing for the document understanding service, like that piece, and then you've also got form processing, which is like you said, you've got these kind of three pillars or components in there, the AI, the content processing, and transforming content. Like that's kind of key. So form processing carries its own licensing as well, I believe.
Yeah. So to start with the licensing is you need the base licensing. So this is an add-on feature. So if you're going to go license it, you license it as an add-on, not as a separate product. So in Microsoft 365, if you have never dealt with licensing, you can go get things like Visio, Office, your standard E3, E5 licenses. And then you can, in addition to those, you have certain add-ons. Like a phone system is an add-on to a plan. You have to have a base plan. You get this as an add-on. This is another one of those. You have to have some Microsoft 365 plan that you get this as an add-on to. And if I remember right, you can get this as an add-on, and I should have pulled up some of this documentation, to either, I think you can get this to E3s or E5s in that Microsoft 365 space. If I'm not mistaken.
So you start out with the Syntex service itself, $5 per user per month.
Exactly. And that gives you the base document understanding functionality, which is the piece I was missing before. I didn't realize this base document understanding functionality came at just that $5 per user per month. So there's a set amount of functionality in there. And then if you want to, you can also do forms processing as a part of Syntex. In this, you buy credits. So you buy $150 base per month of credits that you can use to take advantage of form processing. And we can dive into kind of those differences between document understanding and forms processing, because it's like one of those major differences. It doesn't seem like a lot, but what you can do is quite different with those two. And the other thing with the licensing is, if I remember right, once you have 300 Syntex licenses, so 300 users, you're spending $1,500 per user per month, you do get a set of base credits for forms processing for free. Anything under, I believe, 300 users, and you're going to have to buy credits to even start using forms processing.
Okay, so let's start with document understanding. It's kind of that per user per month part of the service, and then we can dive into form processing and what those credits are getting you in the form of that part of the service.
That functionality.
It's really weird. Like, we're walking down a service tree here, right? There's Syntex at the top, and then within Syntex, there's permutations of service, like underlying services inside of it that may or may not be combined together.
Yep. And I tried to, when I put these notes together for you, I tried to kind of walk down that tree in that in those steps too. So hopefully this makes somewhat of logical sense.
All right. So beyond licensing, what's the primary difference between processing and document understanding? But form processing and document understanding.
Form processing and document understanding. So document understanding lets you, both of them have models. So I'm going to start with some of the similarities. Both of them have AI models that you can build. Document understanding will let you train these AI models to be able to auto-categorize files as certain content types. So people that have done SharePoint for years are very familiar with content types. So in the document understanding world, Every model that you build has a one-to-one relationship with a content type in SharePoint Online. For people that may not know what content types are, or this may be new to them, think of a content type as a file type. This could be like a statement of work or a master services agreement or an estimate or meeting notes or a architecture diagram.
It is a list item or a document and all the associated metadata with it.
Exactly.
So in the case of that architecture diagram, or let's take like an invoice. An invoice is not just the final form PDF that is generated and sent out to whoever you want to collect money from. It's, what's the final billing amount? What was the customer I sent it to? What's their address? Maybe what's the date that I sent the invoice if I need to follow up with them? Like there's all that associated metadata that gets bundled together, and we put that in that thing called a content type.
Yep. And with those, you can also define a template. So this could have preset text and preset things within the content type or within that document. And there starts to become that association between what's in the document and what that metadata is. Because this auto categorization in the document understanding actually uses this model to recognize the contents of the document and then categorize it as a content type, which means you can then apply retention labels to it automatically by nature of this. So you are allowed to use existing content types, as well as when you start building these models, create a brand new content type when you build the model. So you do have that option. If you already have a bunch of content types, you've already invested in content types, you want to use those, that is a very valid option when you start building out this document understanding model.
So for a document understanding model, do I need to extend those existing content types? Like there's going to be other extractions that come along the way. If I'm crawling an invoice, I probably need to have something like a confidence level that I've identified the invoice number in case somebody updates a PDF that's like maybe close and hot spotting, but it doesn't match the previous format, things like that. So are there impacts to my existing content types? And if there are, that could be a little bit weird because your content types could be coming from all over the place, right? A hub or an individual site collection or like an individual list or library. Let's start there.
Okay, so this was the first part that tripped me up and to be honest, it just got a little weird when I was trying to configure it.
No, so you were working with SharePoint Online and things got weird?
It got weird. It got really weird. Anyways, the first thing you do when you set up Syntex is you do have to go kind of configure your initial settings. And what that does is it creates a brand new... I lost your video, so hopefully you're still there. It creates a brand new site within your environment. That is, I'm going to get the URL right here. It is /sites/content center. So this is not to be confused with sites/content type hub, which is where if you're publishing content types across your entire organization, your content types come from. So what I found is I had content types that were already there. I've already created some. I had them in my content type hub. I had set them out to publish to all of my sites. So I spun up Syntex. I created this content center. And then I went to go create a model. Well, right away, this is where I hit my first error was I created a new model. I said, use an existing content type. And I selected one of these content types that had been published down for my content type hub. And I started getting errors. And I was like, well, what the heck? So I started
Yeah,
playing
you're
around.
not making it very far into the process.
I am not. At this point in time, I'm like, I just started this and I'm already getting all kinds of errors. I put something on Twitter. Somebody responded to me. Truth be told, I don't exactly know who this is that responded to me because their Twitter profile is vague. Based on a bunch of searching and Googling and some of the responses, I have a suspicion it is somebody from Microsoft that is closely involved with this. But what I found out via this Twitter conversation and my own investigatory practices is that when you create these models, it is writing something to the content type. And if you have spent time with the content type hub and publishing content types, you will know that content types, when published from the hub, get pushed out to all of your SharePoint sites, and they are classified as read-only. Therefore, when something like the content center that
tries to alter those
exactly, it throws an error because it is unable to write to them because they are read-only. So the good thing is you can go into your advanced settings on your content type. You can go set those to no longer be read-only, go start creating your model, and everything works fine and dandy.
But are you orphaning your content type at that point? Like now, is it a one-off that's associated with just that site collection or that list, or you can still go and make changes from the hub?
So you can still go in and make changes from the hub. However, every time you make a change from the hub and republish your change down, it flips that read-only back to true, which means if you want to go update the model, you have to go flip that back to off. So there's like a battle going on there between...
It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing, right? So...
Right. And then it got even more strange because once you create these models and associate them with that content type hub via the content center, now if you have to pick which sites you want to push this model to. So this doesn't apply to all of the sites in your SharePoint environment. You have to actually go in and say, okay, I want to use this model for this document understanding on this site collection in this document library, this site collection, this document library. Well, guess what the Content Center does when you go specify libraries that you want to use this model on? It tries to push the content type to those sites, which those sites also have their content types marked as read-only because the content type originally came from the hub. So now you're pushing... a content type from the hub, a content type from the content center, both to the same site. And this one's marking them read-only, and this one's trying to write to it. So again, you have to go into all of the sites now that you're trying to push this model down to, mark all of those content types as no longer being read-only, push the model down, and everything works. So as you flip this back and forth between read-only, the good thing is it doesn't break. So this was one of the questions I asked on Twitter was, okay, the content type hub is pushing the content type down. The content center is pushing the content type down. The content center is writing something to the content type. Are these two going to overwrite each other as they battle? Because let's say I go update metadata in my content type hub. Am I going to kill my model?
Yeah, you'd worry about having orphans or one-offs, or you've disconnected the content type from the content type hub along the way. There's a lot of gotchas there. I think the other thing is it sounds like there's quite a bit of friction there. So maybe to take like another use case, say you do like you manage all your like you're in a consultancy, right? You have customers and customers have projects. Say you manage every customer and every customer project in its own site collection. You have 1,000 customers and you want to do some type of document understanding against those. Now you've got to go touch 1,000 different site collections, libraries, whatever it happens to be, like whatever those permutations are. Is there prescriptive guidance out there? Like has Microsoft provided say like a PowerShell script or something like that you can just enumerate or iterate overall, like, hey, here's a path or a prefix for like site collection URLs, go touch all of these things and unlock them, right? Make them writable so that then I can go and perform this action? Or is that a by hand kind of process?
As far as I know, and this is one of those things that I wanted to spend more time with, and frankly, after dealing with all of this, I just ran out of time. I do not know of a way to push this all down at once. It is a prescriptive because I'm going to guess you can do it. I think what you're doing in the content center is, I think it's just updating a list item with a URL. So in theory, you should be able to go write some PowerShell or something to go update all of these. I'm looking at it now.
But there's nothing out there on like the documentation side that you found where it just says, hey, here's a one-off. This is how you can do it. So here's how you do it for the example. I think, documentation is usually pretty good at that, right? Like, hey, start with our example document, go to your example site, do these things. And then there's also, here's how you would do this at scale in your environment.
Yeah, not that I have seen. And I might have to dig through documentation more, or if somebody is listening to this and knows of it, let me know, because we will gladly talk about it on a future episode. But I am not aware of one.
All right, cool. So
you can't update a list. I went in and opened mine. This whole thing creates a separate model file. If you click on the model file, it opens up like a whole nother ASPX page where you go configure all this stuff. But
gotcha.
It's a little odd how you push it out. And like you said, I don't know of a good way that I have found yet to push this out to thousands of sites at once.
All right. So let's take a step back maybe, because that's kind of applying the model, right? And pushing it down. But you also have to create the model. So first you've got to go create that content center. And I imagine the first step for like a model is classification, right? Like show me an existing document and kind of teach me about it a little bit, right?
Yep. So in this SharePoint site, like you said, you go create a model. You say, I want a new model. I want it to be based on this specific content type. And I want it to have this retention label. So that's all you need to actually start with a model and create that shell for the model is content type if you want a retention label applied to it. Once you create the model, you open it up. And the first step is exactly what you said. I need to start training this model. So you can go in and it needs 5 valid files. So let's say in this case, we're creating a service agreement for a client. I need 5 valid service agreements, and then I need 1 invalid file. So something else. It doesn't really care what it is. It just cares that it shouldn't be classified in the same way as those first 5 documents.
Awesome. So you take 5 PDFs or Word documents, whatever they are, toss them in, and then you go and you just do like lorem ipsum in a Word document and upload that, and that's your invalid one, and you use that as the invalid one every time.
So that's what I've done. Like I frankly just grab random documents and I'm like, this is invalid.
All right.
You're probably going to get better results if you get something that's invalid that's close to your existing one. So like grab a service agreement or a master service agreement and grab a statement of work.
Yes.
2 things that are going to have some similar similar formats, similar phrasing, similar text, because the last thing you want this to do is classify documents improperly, because now you have a whole nother problem, because again, as you classify these, it's actually assigning them as a content type, especially if there's no content type already applied to it. So the first thing is you add those documents in.
So that's interesting. So just to dial that one back, you are taking a document and you are uploading it to a document library, and that document library has 2 content types on it. It has document, like the base document content type, and it has service level agreement. So if you upload a new document to that library, it goes in as a document, but then once the engine classifies it, it's done its extraction, it's figured out what it is, it says, oh, I think this is a service level agreement. It'll change it, like its content type from one to the other for you.
Yes.
Oh,
Or
You better
let's
hope
say
the
you
model's like really good, right?
well, yeah, because so I did this. I had a master service agreement and a statement of work, and I had a bunch of other random administrative documents in there. I did a very poor job at training one of my models. I forced this to run against the document library. Every document except for one was all of a sudden classified as a statement of work. And some of them were nowhere near a statement of work. So I had to go back and refine my model. But I give you that word of caution is make sure you test these. Don't just push it out to all 1,000 sites. Roll it slowly to make sure your models are as good as you think they are.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So we've got our classifier. So that thing has to extract some stuff from it, right? Do you have to train the extraction at all too? You've got to tell it what to pull out, right?
So there's a few things that go on here. Before you can even get to some of the extraction, you upload those 5 valid files and that 1 invalid file. And then the next thing you need to do before you can even start training it is you have to include what they call explanations as a part of this file. So there's 3 different types of explanations. There's a phrase. So think of a phrase as you go into this document and you say, I want to add a phrase, give this phrase a label of, we'll go off the master service agreement, client name. Mm-hmm. You select the actual client name, or you can select any text around it. You can really select any text you want to. So it's just a cursor. You highlight the text in the document and say, this is the phrase that matches client name.
That makes sense. Yep. Straightforward.
Or you can do patterns. So think of like a date where the date is different for every document, but it's going to match a specific pattern. So if your document has maybe service date as a phrase followed by a date, you could define it as a pattern of like service phrase, colon, space, number, slash number, slash number. Mm-hmm. And it can use that. Or proximity is if you have 2 phrases or patterns defined, you can say when phrase 1 is within so many characters or is in a certain proximity to phrase 2. So that one's actually using the phrase or pattern explanation and then defining a proximity between 2 phrases or patterns that you've already defined.
Gotcha. So is this anything maybe like information protection or like sensitivity where it does like auto classification for things? I want to find credit card numbers, social security numbers, things like that. Are there example patterns in the service? So I want to go in and like invoices or like MSA numbers like for your internal business are fine, but there's also all these common data types out there in the world, right? Like hundreds and hundreds of them that are just standard. Yep. Are there examples of that in the service, or you've got to go and make those kind of pattern lists every time?
There are. So there's not a ton of them yet. There's probably 10 or so predefined ones. And date is one of them because you can have a date that's year, mm-hmm. slash month, slash day. You can have day, month, year, day, month, year. So there's all those different patterns that a date could take. They have one of those predefined. So you can go in and select, I want to recognize a date pattern. And it has like 20, 30 different iteration or different versions of how a date can be defined. So you don't have to go come up with all of those and define those yourself.
Good. So you got a place that you can kind of start and then look at. But I imagine with a small number, it's probably like US centric data types to start out. Like you might have like credit card numbers in there, but you probably don't have things like Swift codes, right?
Yeah, I should go look.
Like international like banking standards or international like identification kinds of things.
Yeah. So really,
US passport number versus like German passport number kind of thing.
Right. So the ones that are in there is like checkbox, email greeting, email CC, email date, email subject, email recipient, email sender, currency, end of sentence, social security number, credit card number, first word of a sentence, U.S. zip codes, common U.S. and international formatted phone numbers, percentages, numbers, dates. That's all of them right there.
Pretty U.S. centric. So if you're international and you're taking a look at it, then you might have some work to do.
Yep. So once you have those files defined and those explanations set, then you can actually go in and train your model. And it will go through and use a combination of those files you uploaded, the explanations you set, and tell you of all the files you used to train this model, how they got labeled, how they got categorized. So you can look and see this one was positive, this one matched, this one matched, this one was negative, this one didn't match, matched, and get at least an initial idea there of if they matched and if they didn't match.
Gotcha. How long is there an expectation for how long it takes to train or retrain a model once they're in there based on your data set?
So I was doing it with 5 to 10 documents, and it took less than a minute to train it.
Okay, so they're kind of kicking off immediately. They're not coming back and saying 2 hours later, come back, or 24 hours later. Yep.
It's train it while you watch, and then you can, if you want to test it, you can move to test where you can upload more files and run some tests to see how it works. I just push mine out because I like to live on the edge and I didn't want to. So the downside is you have all these files in your different SharePoint sites. You actually have to go download them all and re-upload them to this SharePoint site.
You got to pull them out and get them over to the content center here, right?
Right, in order to test and train. And I was like, I'm just trying to figure this out. I'm not going to take that much time to go download 300 files to do training and testing. But obviously, the more files you train with and the more explanations you can put in there, the better you can get your model.
Yeah, and that all makes sense. So once I've got that in, I've got my model trained, tested. I've dialed in my explanations, right? Whether it was patterns or phrases or whatever it is about those things. Then I can apply that model. Right? And we kind of talked about that, potentially having to make read-only content types no longer read-only, unlock them, push that out. Is there anything special that you have to do around extraction? So great, it finds that date and that MSA number and the correct portion of your service level agreement document, but now it needs to extract that data and through application of the model, go ahead and put it into the metadata that's associated with the content type, whatever the heck that is.
Yeah. So it's not something you have to do. That extraction is kind of optional. So if you want to just train it and have it auto set your content types and your attention labels and call it good, you can do that. You can publish this out, push it out to a document library. It will run through the model on an upload of a document, or once you've pushed this out to a document library, you do get a new option in your document library to select documents and automatically run them through the model to kind of force the classification of them.
Okay. Are there anything you need to worry about in the document library itself? Required metadata fields like that, potentially messing things up on upload. Like, is there a good desired state for a document library for at least the classification engine to work with it along the way?
Yeah, not that I have found, but I can imagine you could run into issues with certain required metadata. So that's one option. You just shove it out that way. It does add a couple of columns too to your document library. I should mention this, where it will add some document or some labels in that library. I'm going to go pop open a library here so I actually give you the right ones, where you'll have that retention label that you can apply, but then it does give you a confidence score and a classification date. So those are going to be automatically populated with the date the classification model ran against that document and how confident essentially that model is that it got categorized properly. And it could be confidence that it was not classified at all. So even mine that it just left it as a document has a 99.99996% confidence score because it was really positive. It didn't match any of the models.
Excellent.
But all that said, once you do that, that's well and good. If you want to start extracting data, you also do have that option with this document understanding where you can say, as a part of this, as it goes in and finds this information, take it out of the document and put it into a metadata field that's associated with this content type. And this is where it gets a little bit more challenging for a lot of documents that I've played with this on, where the label and where this starts differentiating itself from the form processing. So if you get to that point and you're like, okay, I'm starting to classify documents. Now I want to pull things out of my document, like the date that the service is going to start or the client name out of this master service agreement. You can go in and say, I want to build a new extraction model. I want it to extract the client name out. So you select the column, you select the text to use as the field label, but now you have to start doing explanations for these extractions as well.
Gotcha. So it becomes kind of a per data point thing that you have to put together versus the entire document or the entire object itself.
Correct. So going back to, we'll stick with our service agreement example. Let's say, for instance, you want to pull out the client name out of this document. And you are using simply client as that metadata extractor from the document. Because you're just defining it based on a phrase, it will find every time the word client exists in the document and think that is associating the word immediately after it as the client name. Something similar with a date. If you define just a date pattern, it will go try to pull every date, and then it doesn't necessarily always know, well, I found 10 dates in your document. Which one is actually the service date that I'm supposed to write to this field? So you have to start leveraging multiple explanations to say, match the pattern of client : space, and then have the client name, and just make sure you're not having that anywhere else in your document where this may pick it up.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Like it is different. It's kind of broader entity extraction versus really like targeted, which I imagine like forms processing is, where you're maybe going to have like document hotspotting and things like that, right? Like a form recognizer, where I would go in and say, within this SLA or within this invoice, it's always the same in my organization. So in the top left corner of every invoice I send out, there's this little box with invoice number, and you tell the you tell that form recognition service that, hey, here's where this thing is all the time, and then it doesn't matter if there's other stuff around it.
Right, exactly. And that's what, so as kind of a goofy example, I was like, so I wonder if I can go like copy and paste all of the messages out of the message center in Microsoft 365, throw them in a Word document, and have it pull out the ID of the roadmap, pull out when this is going to roll out, because all of the message center messages are close, but they're not all identical. Certain things I could pull out right away. The ID of the message in the message center, MC 6-digit number. I could define that as a pattern, right, really easily. Rollout date, they use all kinds of different things. So it's the header above it is like, this starts rolling out, or this will roll out. That's really similar, but then some things are like, it'll hit the public in Q1, or
target
rolling
date,
out to test.
this
Yes.
ring, it's targeted at these types of users. Yeah, there's a lot of variability there.
Right. So if I was using form processing, kind of like you said, I could define it is always going to be like the line under the rollout. But with this having to doing an explanation, because there's no format or because the text of the actual date, pulling out the line after that rollout date, pulling out the line after the line that's always similar or always the same is really, really hard.
Gotcha.
Because
I mean,
it'll
that
tend
makes
to chop
sense,
it off. Right. It'll chop it off in the middle. It'll grab all of it. It'll grab the second half of it. It'll do all kinds of goofy things.
So I think that makes sense, and there's totally the second half of kind of the service to talk about with forms, which this has been a pretty good dive on document understanding. Let's tie all this back. Maybe what we can do is kind of maybe leave forms for another time and dive into that and have the same kind of meaty discussion. But let's tie some of this back to kind of how we started with licensing and acquiring the service. So everything for document understanding was $5 per user per month.
Yep.
How does that is that tied back to who can create and like who can create the models, the explanations, who can work with the content center, or is that a license that's applied to every user who uploads a document that is going to be subject to one of these models?
I just have one user in my environment. I didn't look at that, Scott. Okay. I actually don't know. I think it is everybody that might use one of these models. Because each time it runs, it's having to run it through the model. I don't know if you have the documentation up there. I just tried to find it. I am pretty sure it's anybody that creates a model and anybody that uses a model.
Okay. Well, I mean, that gets interesting pretty quick, right? I have my project site and I have 50 project team members and we all upload documents to the same place. Yep. And now that thing has to run against my document library for 50 users who are generating, say each one's generating like, whatever, one document a day, one document a week, it doesn't matter. But that's 50 uploads and 50 runs, whether it finds something in that document or not.
Here we go. I found it. Which users need a license? It's in their FAQ. Imagine that. So you need a license, that $5 a user a month license, if you access the content center where these models are created, if you create an understanding model, which makes sense because that's going to be in the content center, if you upload content to a library where the document understanding model is associated. So if you're uploading documents that are using the model, you need it. If you manually execute an understanding model, which you have to have access to it and upload it to do it. If you view a library where a document understanding model is associated, if you upload content, and then all the same things for forms processing. So this is a prerequisite to forms processing. I mean, general rule of thumb, if you're going to view a library, there's probably a lot of people that are just going to license this across the board. But you wouldn't necessarily have to. If you're only wanting to run this on a specific site, maybe like a document center where only the legal document or legal department is adding files to it for retention purposes, you could maybe license this for 5 or 10 people that access a single site collection that this is running against.
Makes sense. I think it like that kind of clarifies too why everything's so locked down.
Right.
And why you have to go and why you have to go apply it per library. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it would have been nice. I would have liked to have seen this like associated with the content type hub in some way. I feel like working with this, it would have made more sense to put it in the same site collection, so you're not messing with the read-only stuff.
As an extension, yeah.
Right. Because it really does feel like an extension of that, the way it works and pushes content types out. But given this licensing model, you can also understand why they had to keep it separate as well.
Yes. Yeah. That all kind of comes together.
So yeah, it's interesting. And again, for $5, a user a month. I didn't think you got to create those models at first. I thought at first you needed that $150 for credits for everything. So it can be a challenge to create these models. There's certainly a lot of stuff where I wish I was paying for the forms processing. But I have also been pleasantly surprised with the amount of functionality you can get for $5 per month per user.
It does sound like it's pretty feature rich. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's been fun. It only took me like 4 or 5 hours one morning to figure all that out too.
That's all.
Yeah. So we can dive into forms processing. That one I haven't done as much with because frankly, I'm not paying $150 a month for myself, but maybe I'll just have to go buy that for a month or two so we can play with it and dive into that.
Well, I think even if we just talk about it, just to kind of really nail down that difference between the two of them, because it is a little bit like a hydra, right? Like you're coming in and saying syntax, but back to that whole like service tree things. Like if we're going to go down to this level, let's explain both.
Right.
Go both the options on the level. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Future episode to look forward to.
All right, cool. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. I enjoyed it. It was fun to actually play with this and start figuring it out some.
I know how you like to play with new services. Maybe next time we'll get you in some PowerShell.
It's a bad, I don't know if it's a habit or an addiction or what, but
it's a thing. We'll leave it at that.
If it's new and I can test it and I can get my hands on it, I will often do that regardless of the consequences. Just ask how many times I've reformatted my laptop or something because of betas and yeah. So, all right, well, go enjoy your... What day is it, Scott? I was going to say enjoy your weekend, but we're recording this in the middle of the week.
It's just it's a day. We'll leave it at that. Someday days will mean something again, but today is not that day.
No, today is just another day. All right, well, go enjoy your day, and we will talk to you later.
All right, thanks, Ben.
All right, thanks, Scott.